For 11 nights, Pocket slept inside the same empty barrel. May Danner moved him twice. Each time, the old raccoon limped back before dawn, dragged himself over the rim, and curled against the bottom, as if guarding a grave. He ignored the warmer stove, the apple crate lined with burlap, and even the dish of cornmeal May left beside the door. The barrel was numbered 47B. It had never been sold. It had never carried liquor. It had stood unfinished in her husband's cooperage since the winter Elias died near the freight warehouse 2 years earlier. On the 12th morning, Gideon Price arrived with a seizure order. The county tax collector spoke gently. He always did. He reminded May that Elias had been accused of supplying smugglers, that the unpaid penalties had reached $742, and that the law gave her 21 final days before the cooperage, and 6 acres behind it went to auction. Then he saw pockets inside barrel 47B. Gideon's voice stopped. His fingers tightened around the seizure papers, and his eyes dropped to the lower hoop. He ordered his deputy to destroy that barrel before making the inventory. May asked why. Gideon smiled and said rotten containers could conceal contraband. But the staves were sound, the hoops were tight, and the barrel smelled only of oak dust and pine resin. Pockets began clawing at the bottom. His stiff paw slipped twice. On the third try, one narrow board lifted. May reached beneath it and found a false floor. Inside lay flakes of red sealing wax, 18 barrel numbers written in Elias's hand, and a brass sealing die engraved on the handle with the initials E.D. Those were her husband's initials. But the face of the die carried the official star of Gideon Price's tax office, split by a tiny crack along one point. May did not touch the face of the die. Elias had taught her never to drag a thumb across a fresh engraving, and the warning returned so clearly that she could almost hear him behind her. Sleeves rolled, asking for the fine file. Gideon recovered first. He stepped closer, still wearing the mild expression Mercy Crossing trusted. "That is county property, Mrs. Danner. It was under my husband's floor, inside a barrel named in a tax investigation." May looked at the 18 numbers. The handwriting was Elias's, but hurried and uneven, nothing like the patient marks he cut into finished hoops. Beside 3 numbers he had made short strokes. Beside another he had drawn a small circle. She wanted time to study them. Gideon wanted the opposite. His deputy, Owen Strake, held out a hand. He was younger than May, and had once brought Elias a split wagon hub after midnight, ashamed to admit he could not afford a new one. Now he would not meet her eyes. "The die, the wax, and the list," Gideon said. "They must be entered with the inventory." May folded the paper once and closed her fingers around it. "The inventory has not begun." People had gathered at the open doors. Mercy Crossing did not need a bell to announce a widow's trouble. The blacksmith's apprentice stood near the rain barrel. Mrs. Tally from the boarding house watched beneath a green parasol. 2 men from the feed store whispered that Elias had hidden more than anyone knew. Gideon heard them and lowered his voice. "You have endured enough public embarrassment. Do not make this harder than it is." The kindness in his tone struck more cruelly than anger. May had heard the same softness at Elias's funeral, when Gideon paid $9 toward the coffin and told her a wife should not be held accountable for every weakness in her husband. Since then, every customer lost to rumor had seemed to carry that sentence with it. May set the brass die on the workbench but kept the list. "You may inspect it here." Gideon's gaze rested on her closed hand. "Interfering with a lawful seizure can become a separate offense. So can destroying something before it is inventoried." The deputy shifted his weight. Gideon merely turned toward the doorway and asked the onlookers to give May privacy. It sounded considerate. It also made the crowd step back as if she had already done something shameful. Pockets remained in the barrel, his chest rising quickly. May lifted him out and felt how little weight there was beneath his coarse gray coat. His bad paw curled against her sleeve. For years he had followed Elias through the cooperage, sleeping near the steaming vat in winter and stealing wooden pegs from the sorting tray. After Elias died, he stopped climbing the loft ladder and rarely crossed the yard. Whatever had brought him to 47B had cost him more than the town could see. May placed him in the burlap-lined apple crate. He tried to rise at once. "Stay," she whispered. Pockets watched the workbench with his clear left eye. Gideon began the inventory himself. He moved down the rows with a pencil, naming tools and materials in a clerkly rhythm. 2 Cooper's adzes, 1 crow's plane, 3 hoop drivers, 46 seasoned white oak staves. Each item became a thing the county might take. May had spent the morning repairing flour barrels for 6 cents apiece. By evening, Gideon's paper could reduce the tools of her trade to auction lots. She had kept the cooperage alive for 23 months after Elias's death. At first, customers came because they pitied her. Later they stopped because Gideon's notices suggested every Danner barrel might draw scrutiny at the freight depot. May learned to plane staves with Elias's longer draw knife, though its handle bruised her palms. She learned which merchants paid slowly and how long cornmeal could be stretched when cash ran thin. What she had not learned was how to argue with a county seal. Gideon reached barrel 47B and paused. Unfinished container, suspected association with untaxed spirits. It never held anything. That will be determined by the office. He marked the page. May studied the die on the bench. The crack in the star ran from the edge toward the center in a clean, deliberate line. Elias had disliked careless work. Even when making a common flour brand, he tested the impression 3 times before letting it leave the shop. If he had cut that flaw, he had meant it to remain. The thought did not comfort her. A craftsman could mark his own crime as easily as another man's. By late afternoon, Gideon had tagged the saw bench, steam box, and most of the oak stock. He took the brass die, wrapping it in cloth before placing it in his leather case. May noticed he never pressed it into fresh wax to verify the impression. At the door, he gave her a receipt for one unregistered metal implement and advised her not to discuss the matter until the county finished examining it. "Rumor has already harmed you," he said. "There is no wisdom in feeding it." When he was gone, the cooperage seemed larger and emptier. The crowd dispersed slowly, carrying pieces of her humiliation toward the mercantile and church steps. May barred the doors, unfolded Elias's list, and copied the 18 numbers onto an old invoice. She hid the original inside the lining of her boot, pockets scratched at the apple crate. "You have done enough." He climbed out anyway, landed badly, and rested before limping toward the rear wall. Instead of returning to 47B, he nosed beneath a stack of discarded hoops. May moved them aside and found a narrow strip of oak blackened at one end. A shipping number had been burned into the wood, 32K. It matched the 6th entry on Elias's list. May knew that strip. She had cut it herself from a flour barrel repaired for Bell's Bakery 3 years earlier. The barrel had split before delivery and never gone near the freight warehouse. After the repair failed, Elias had broken it apart for kindling. Yet beside 32K on the hidden list, he had written a single word: whiskey. May waited until the lamps in the tax office went dark before she spread Elias's old order books across the workbench. Pocket slept beneath the stove with his bad paw tucked against his chest, but every few minutes his clear eye opened and followed her hands. The number 32K appeared in the spring book from 3 years earlier. Elias had written Bell's Bakery beside it, then crossed the line twice and added split before delivery. May remembered the barrel because the flaw had been hers. She had driven one stave too tightly, and the oak had cracked when the hoop cooled. Elias had not scolded her. He had shown her how to listen for strain in the wood, then broken the ruined barrel into kindling. A second entry recorded the replacement Bell's Bakery, received 2 days later. That barrel carried a different number. May placed the blackened strip beside the order book. If 32K had never been completed, it could not have carried whiskey through the freight warehouse. Yet Elias had written whiskey beside it, on the hidden list. The contradiction answered one question and opened another. Elias had not been recording what the barrels truly held. He had been recording what someone claimed they held. Near midnight, Pocket stirred and dragged himself to the bench. He sniffed the strip, then nosed the corner where Gideon had wrapped the brass die. A crumb of red wax clung between 2 boards. May eased it free with a needle and held it close to the lamp. The star was faint, but the crack along one point was visible. She pressed the wax between folded paper and placed it with her copy of the 18 numbers. Gideon had taken the die. He had not taken every impression it had made. By morning, May had prepared a letter to the state revenue office in Topeka. She did not accuse Gideon of theft or fraud. A widow with no lawyer could lose more from one reckless sentence than a tax collector lost from 10 careful lies. She wrote only what she could prove. An unfinished barrel number appeared on a private list marked as whiskey. A sealing die engraved with Elias Danner's initials bore the star used by the Bryan County Tax Office, and the star contained a repeated crack that might distinguish one die from another. She addressed the letter to Thomas Reed, Deputy Revenue Auditor. whose name appeared at the bottom of a circular Elias had kept in the order drawer. The circular was 4 years old. May had no assurance Reed still held the position, or that anyone in Topeka would care about one cooperage in Mercy Crossing. Still, the envelope was the first piece of the truth Gideon could not easily lock inside his leather case. Pockets followed her into the yard. After 6 steps he stopped, breathing through his open mouth. May lifted him into a market basket lined with a folded flour sack. He disliked being carried and gripped the rim with his good paw, but he did not try to climb out. At the post office, the clerk weighed the envelope twice and charged May 3 cents. Deputy Strake entered while the clerk was stamping the receipt. He looked from the basket to the address on the envelope. "County business?" he asked. "Mine." His face tightened with discomfort rather than hostility. "Mr. Price said you were not to circulate seized material. He seized the die. He did not seize my memory." The clerk kept his eyes on the scale. Strake could have taken the envelope and claimed authority later. Instead, he stepped aside. "Gideon will hear of it. He hears of most things." May paid for a registration slip, though it cost another 5 cents she needed for lamp oil. She folded the receipt into her glove. If the letter vanished, at least the post office would have to admit it had existed. Outside, Pockets began turning in the basket. His nose lifted toward the east road, where the smell of fresh bread drifted between the buildings. May thought he wanted food until he scratched at the basket and made a low, impatient sound. Bell's Bakery occupied a narrow brick shop behind the mercantile. Cal Bell was pulling loaves from the oven when May entered. He had known Elias for 20 years and had stopped buying Danner barrels after the first tax notice appeared. His greeting was polite enough to hurt. May showed him the strip marked 32K and asked whether he still had the receipt for the replacement barrel. Cal wiped flour from his hands. "That matter is 3 years buried. It was never buried for me." He studied the number, then glanced at the basket. Pockets had fixed his attention on a stack of flour bins along the back wall. "Your husband made good barrels," Cal said, until people began saying what else he made. "I am not asking you to defend him. I am asking what you received." Cal disappeared into the office and returned with a bundle of invoices tied in blue string. The original order listed 32K. The next line, in Elias's writing, credited the bakery for 1 defective barrel and replaced it with 33K at no cost. Cal had signed beneath both entries. May asked if she could copy the lines. He hesitated, then pushed the paper toward her. "Copy them here. The invoices stay." As she wrote, Pockets climbed from the basket. His hind feet struck the floor awkwardly, and he paused until the trembling in his front leg eased. Then he moved past the flour bins toward a rear door. Cal blocked him with a boot. "That animal gets into my meal, I'll charge you for it." Pockets sat back, but his nose remained pointed toward the alley. May finished the copy and carried him outside. The alley ran behind the bakery toward the abandoned freight warehouse. Pockets twisted until she lowered the basket. He limped through drifts of chaff and coal dust, stopping twice to rest. May nearly picked him up again, but he pressed forward along the wall, as if following something older than the morning's scents. Behind the warehouse, broken crates and condemned containers lay beneath a sagging canvas. The county stored unsold seizure lots there until weather reduced them to firewood. May had avoided the place since Elias died near the loading platform. Even from the alley, she could see the iron post where his body had been found, after the night watchman claimed a wagon struck him. Pockets crawled beneath the canvas. May pulled it back and found 7 barrels on their sides. Most had split from rain and frost. One still carried a strip of red wax around the bung. Its number, burned beneath the upper hoop, was 61A. A number May had glimpsed on an older flour delivery invoice in Cal Bell's bundle. That number stood 9th on Elias's hidden list, and beside it he had written the same single word he had placed beside 32K. Whiskey. 2 barrels, both recorded as spirits. One had never been finished. The other still carried its true contents in every seam. May knelt and turned the barrel until light reached its interior. White dust coated the joints. She wet one finger, touched the powder, and rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. Fine wheat flour gathered in the lines of her skin. The smell remained unmistakable beneath the damp oak. The barrel had not merely held flour once. A crust of it was still packed beneath the lower rim. Yet the red wax across its bung bore the cracked county star. Behind her, a door opened inside the freight warehouse, and someone began drawing back the bolt. The bolt scraped back, and May rose too quickly, knocking her shoulder against the barrel hoop. Pockets flattened himself beneath the canvas, his body rigid except for the quick movement of his nose. The rear door opened 3 inches. Jonah Hale looked through the gap. A burn scar climbed from his collar to his left ear. He had once owned the largest forge in Mercy Crossing. The county had taken it 4 years earlier, after 2 untaxed whiskey containers were found in a wagon axle shipment, and Jonah had blamed Elias from the day the seizure notice went up. "You should not be here," he said. "Neither should this barrel." His eyes moved to 61A, then to the white flower on her fingers. Whatever surprise touched his face disappeared beneath anger. "Put the canvas back." May heard paper sliding across wood inside the warehouse. "Who was in there?" "No one you need to meet." Jonah stepped outside and pulled the door shut. His coat bulged at one side. When Pockets crawled from beneath the canvas, Jonah's hand closed around something hard inside the pocket. "What are you carrying?" May asked. "Something that survived your husband." Jonah turned toward the alley, but Pockets planted himself before his boot and sniffed the coat hem. Jonah tried to step around. The raccoon followed and pawed at the bulge. Jonah pushed him aside with the edge of his boot, enough to roll Pockets onto his bad shoulder. May caught the animal before he struck the brick. "Do that again and I will bring every shopkeeper on Market Street. Your husband made the barrel hoops that ruined me. He made flour barrels too. That did not turn them into whiskey." Jonah drew a rusted iron band from his coat and dropped it onto the barrel. A number had been punched near the rivet, 74C. May checked her copy of Elias's list. The number stood 12th, with whiskey written beside it. "That hoop came off the axle crate they used against me," Jonah said. "I kept it because it was the only part the auction men did not carry away." "Why were you inside?" "Looking for the matching stave. I wanted proof. Elias branded my crate after I loaded it." May turned the hoop in her hands. Danner hoops used square-headed rivets. This one had a round rivet flattened on both sides. Jonah's own work. The number, however, had been punched with the narrow set Elias used at the cooperage. That made Jonah's accusation possible. It did not make it true. "Show me where the crate was stored." "You think I waited 4 years to guide his widow through the place?" "I think you waited because no one believed you." He looked toward the warehouse wall. "The county clerk came yesterday and burned 2 bundles of manifests. I saved what I could." He opened the door. The warehouse smelled of damp rope, old grain, and mice. Rows of shelves stood mostly empty. Near the stove, blackened paper scraps lay mixed with fresh ash. Jonah kept one hand near the inside pocket of his coat as he led her toward the stove. May could not decide whether he had rescued the burned sheet or helped destroy the rest. 4 years of grievance could make a man patient, and Elias's death had left no one for Jonah to confront except her. When she asked who had given him a key, he showed her a bent strip of spring steel instead. "The county sold my forge to Gideon's cousin for $81, he said. "They forgot to sell me the knowledge of how locks work." That answer made him no less dangerous. It only made him useful. Pockets lagged behind them. The short walk from the alley had reopened the trembling in his injured leg, and he sat twice before reaching the shelves. May almost carried him back outside. Then he lifted his nose toward the rear cabinet, refusing to turn away. Jonah pulled a half-burned sheet from beneath an iron shovel. The top was gone, but 3 freight entries remained. Each listed a date, wagon number, destination, and clerk's mark. One entry carried 74C. The cargo column read machine parts, not spirits. "This proves what you shipped," May said. "It proves what I wrote." "Who signed the receiving line?" Jonah pointed to the surviving lower edge of a signature. "Ruth B." Ruth Bell had been clerk of the county warehouse for 15 years before Gideon announced her retirement. She lived behind the Methodist chapel and had not spoken to May since Elias's funeral. A scrape came from the far end of the building. Pockets was limping between 2 rows of shelves. He stopped beneath a low cabinet and pulled out a short piece of rawhide cord. Red wax clung to one knot. May recognized the bitter oil Elias used to protect engraving tools from rust. She reached beneath the cabinet and found a shallow wooden tray. 6 circular stains marked the dust, as if metal dies had rested there for years. 5 were empty. In the 6th lay a curl of red wax and a sliver of brass. Jonah stared at it. "They stamped cargo here, after it reached the warehouse. That changed the shape of the crime. If seals were applied after goods were unloaded, the cooperage and forge were not necessarily sources of illegal liquor. Ordinary freight could have been relabeled once it entered county custody. The discovery answered why Elias's numbers appeared in tax cases. It raised a harder question. Who could enter after hours and alter both seals and records? Jonah lifted the tray. Beneath it, someone had scratched 3 letters into the shelf. GPO. Gideon Price Office, May said. Or Gideon Price Order. Elias could have written it. The old defense rose in her, but she forced it down. Jonah was right to say it. Truth would not strengthen, because she rejected every possibility that hurt. They found no ledger, only freight tags, and 2 broken sealing sticks. One tag carried Bell's Bakery. Another bore the mark of a lamp oil dealer in Cedar Bluff. Neither business sold whiskey. Footsteps sounded outside. Jonah extinguished the nearest lamp and pulled May behind a row of shelves. Pockets crouched beside her skirt. Through a gap between boards, she saw Deputy Strake enter with Gideon's clerk, Walter Pym, who carried a canvas satchel. "The auditor's copy first," Pym said. "Mr. Price wants nothing left that can be mistaken later." Strake looked toward the stove. "Burning records after a seizure will be mistaken plenty. These are duplicates. Then leave them." And Pym ignored him and gathered papers from a locked desk near the front platform. Strake stood rigid but did not interfere. May watched Pym remove a narrow blue ledger and place it in the satchel. Faded gold letters on its spine read Rail Dispatch. Pockets shifted. The rawhide cord between his teeth scraped the floor. Pym turned. Jonah kicked a loose crate toward the rear wall. It crashed, and Strake ran toward the sound. Jonah slipped through a side gap, drawing both men after him. May crossed to the desk and searched the remaining dispatch sheets for dates from Elias's list. Most pages had been torn out. One carbon copy remained caught beneath the drawer rail. It listed freight wagon 18 on the night 61A, was supposedly shipped to Topeka with 12 barrels of whiskey. The tax record May had copied named the same wagon and date, but the rail dispatch line was blank. No locomotive number, conductor, destination stamp, or weight. At the bottom, in Ruth Bell's hand, one sentence crossed the empty entry. Wagon 18 never arrived. Shipment reported by county office only. Pym's footsteps returned from the far aisle. May folded the carbon copy into her sleeve, lifted pockets against her chest, and slipped through the rear door as Jonah shouted from the loading yard. By the time she reached the alley, she understood what the missing rail line meant. The county had not merely lied about what was inside the barrels. It had invented the journey itself. May did not return to the cooperage by the main street. She carried pockets through the lanes behind the livery, keeping the carbon copy flat inside her sleeve. Twice riders passed on Market Road, and each time she stopped beneath an awning until the hoofbeats faded. Pockets had gone quiet. His breathing came shallow and fast against her arm. At home, May set him beside the stove and warmed a cloth for his injured paw. He tried to rise when she unfolded the dispatch copy, but she rested a hand between his shoulders until he settled. The blank rail entry changed everything. Gideon's office had reported 12 barrels of whiskey on a wagon that never reached the station. The county then treated those barrels as taxable goods, added penalties, and used the debt to seize property. The scheme no longer looked like a handful of false seals. It looked like a machine. May copied Ruth Bell's sentence, then hid the carbon sheet beneath a loose brick in the chimney wall. Before dawn, someone rattled the front latch. Deputy Strake stood outside with a folded order. He looked as though he had not slept. "Mr. Price says county records were removed from the freight warehouse. Then he should question the man who was carrying them away." Strake's jaw tightened. "Walter Pym says you entered unlawfully." Walter Pym was burning manifests. "I did not see him burn anything. You saw enough to know he should not have been there. The order allowed seizure of county property found on the premises, but it carried Gideon's signature rather than a judge's. This is not a warrant. It is an administrative recovery order. It is a piece of paper written by the man whose records are missing." Strake lowered his voice. "Do not force me to bring the sheriff." May stepped aside. Refusing would let Gideon say she was concealing evidence. Allowing the search might show her what he feared most. Strake opened drawers, inspected shelves, and lifted loose floorboards with his boot. He found her copy of the 18 numbers, but not the original list in her boot lining, or the carbon sheet in the chimney. He also found the bakery invoice and the post office receipt addressed to Thomas Reed. "This letter has already gone. Yesterday morning." Concern outweighed duty in his face. He returned the receipt. "Gideon will know the state office was contacted." "He already knows." "No," he suspected. Suspicion makes him careful. Proof makes him move. Strake left with only a statement that no county document had been recovered. Before mounting, he said Gideon had called a special tax hearing for the following afternoon. May's debt might be accelerated if the board believed she was interfering with enforcement. The threat worked because it sounded procedural. May spent the morning at Ruth Bell's house. Ruth answered after the third knock. She was a narrow woman with silver hair pulled tightly behind her head. The room smelled of camphor and boiled tea. May placed her copy of the dispatch note on the table. Ruth read it standing. "Where did you get this?" "From the rail desk." "That desk was locked. Not well enough." Ruth pushed the paper back. "You should burn it. You wrote, 'That wagon, 18, never arrived.' I wrote many things. Did Gideon invent the shipment?" Ruth turned toward the window. "Your husband came to the warehouse after dark. He brought seals. He brought lists. I saw him." The words struck where Gideon's accusations had failed. May had expected uncertainty, not confirmation. "Did he stamp the barrels?" "Sometimes." "On whose order?" Ruth's silence became an answer, but not one May could use. May showed her the hidden numbers. Ruth's gaze caught on 61A and 74C before she looked away. What happened after those numbers were entered? Taxes were assessed, and when the owners could not pay, the county followed the law. What did that mean? Ruth sat. First came the assessment, then a penalty after 10 days, storage fees after 30. If the owner protested, the hearing was delayed while the fees continued. By the time the board ruled, the debt was larger than the property could bear. How many lost their businesses? "I do not know. You kept the books for 15 years. I said I do not know." At the sharpness in Ruth's voice, Pockets lifted his head in the basket. Ruth glanced toward a side cabinet and moved to block May's view. A faint red smear marked the latch. "Take that animal outside," Ruth said too quickly. May did not. "What is in the cabinet?" "Nothing that belongs to you." Ruth's anger gave way to fear. "Gideon left a box here after I retired. I never opened it." May believed the first sentence and doubted the second. Inside the cabinet sat a pine case, holding 12 assessment notices tied in gray ribbon. Each concerned a different trade: forge, bakery, harness shop, tannery, wagon repair, candle works. All listed untaxed spirits discovered in containers associated with the business. Several carried the cracked star seal. Ruth touched the top notice. "I kept these because the figures did not match the warehouse entries." "Why did Gideon leave them with you?" "He did not know I had them. I copied the originals before they were replaced." The first notice belonged to Jonah Hale. His original tax was $46. A second line, written later in darker ink, changed it to $146. Penalties raised the total to $212. His forge sold for $81. Martha Venn's tax changed from $32 to $132. Her harness shop sold for $74. Amos Creed's candle works went from $28 to $128 and sold for $69. The same hand had added a single digit before each original amount. May asked who purchased the properties. Ruth shook her head. The assessment book and auction book were kept separately. "Where?" "County records room. Gideon has the key." A carriage stopped outside. Gideon entered without knocking. He removed his hat and greeted Ruth as if visiting a sick parishioner. His eyes moved once to the open cabinet, then to May. "I had hoped you would use these final days to save your cooperage," he said. "Not to involve an elderly woman in stolen records." Ruth closed the case. Her hands shook. "They are copies," May said. "Copies made from county documents without authority remain improper. Improper is not the same as false." Gideon sighed. "Grief can make patterns where none exist." Elias supplied marked containers. Taxes followed. The owners defaulted. The board acted. Why did the amounts change? Corrections occur. Always by $100? His gaze sharpened. "You should be careful with arithmetic you do not fully understand." May took the 3 notices from the table. Gideon stepped between her and the door. "Those papers remain with Mrs. Bell." Ruth looked at him, then at May. "Fear 1. Leave them." May set the notices down. "Then I will copy the names." Gideon's voice stayed gentle. "The hearing tomorrow will determine whether your remaining 21 days are preserved. Continued interference may leave the board no choice but to accelerate the auction." The law was no longer background pressure. He was using it as a clock. May left with only the names and figures written inside her glove. That afternoon, Jonah met her behind the abandoned schoolhouse. He had learned Walter Pym was moving ledgers from the records room before the hearing. Together they entered the courthouse through a cellar window used for coal delivery. Jonah kept watch while May searched the auction index. Each seized property listed an owner, sale price, and buyer. Jonah's forge had been purchased by Caleb Morrow. Martha Venn's harness shop had gone to Samuel Pike. Amos Creed's candleworks had gone to Lewis Trent. 3 different men. May nearly closed the book. Then she noticed the same notation beside each buyer's name. Payment guaranteed through Bryan County Mercantile Trust. She pulled the trust ledger from the adjoining shelf. Caleb Morrow, Samuel Pike, and Lewis Trent had no individual accounts. Their purchases were funded through the same escrow number, account 47. The authorized beneficiary was Gideon Price. May copied the beneficiary line twice before returning the trust ledger to its shelf. Jonah wanted to tear out the page. She refused. A missing page would give Gideon one more reason to call every later discovery stolen. They left the courthouse through the coal window just before dusk. Pockets had remained at the cooperage, sleeping beside the stove under a wool shawl. Leaving him behind had felt like betrayal, but his breathing had not fully settled since the freight yard. May could not ask an old animal to carry every burden Elias had buried. At home, she spread the names from Ruth's notices beside the auction index. 3 victims were no longer an accident. She searched Elias's hidden list and found 12 entries matched to businesses already gone from Mercy Crossing. A forge, a harness shop, a candleworks, a tannery, 2 wagon repair sheds, a cooperage in North Briar, a soap maker, a seed warehouse, a milliner, a lamp oil dealer, and a small brewery that had closed before Gideon's Temperance Society was founded. The 13th number was 47B, her own barrel. May sat very still. The number did not mean the county had already used it in a false shipment. It meant Elias had expected them to. A knock came at the rear door. Jonah entered with Amos Creed, the former candle maker. Amos was 67 and walked with a mesquite cane. He carried a packet of sale receipts, wrapped in newspaper. "I kept these because my wife said a man should know the price of his own ruin," he said. His assessment had begun at $28. Fees and penalties raised it to $183. At auction, his shop sold for $69 to Lewis Trent. 3 months later, Trent transferred it to Bryan County Mercantile Trust for $1 and settlement of private obligations. Jonah produced a similar transfer for his forge. Caleb Morrow had held it only 6 weeks before assigning it to the same trust. By midnight, 2 more former owners arrived after Jonah sent word. Martha Venn brought her harness shop deed. Eli Croft, once a wagon maker, brought a tax notice with a barrel number matching Elias's list. Each property followed the same path. False liquor assessment, increased debt, low auction price, temporary buyer, transfer to the trust. The buyers were not owners. They were doors. May added dates beside the names. The first seizure had occurred 7 years earlier. The latest had been posted 4 months before Elias died. The pattern touched families who had never spoken to one another because shame had kept them apart. Amos looked toward the sleeping raccoon. "That creature found all this?" "He found the first place to look." "No," Martha said. "He found the place your husband left for you." The room quieted. May had spent 4 days treating Elias as either innocent or guilty, as though truth must choose one shape. Yet his handwriting stood beside every false shipment. Ruth had seen him carry seals. The brass die bore his initials. Evidence against Gideon did not erase evidence against Elias. After the others left, May searched the cooperage for anything connected to account 47. She inspected order drawers, toolboxes, and the shelf where Elias kept invoices. Nothing carried the number, except the barrel itself and the trust ledger entry she had copied. Pockets woke when she opened Elias's old metalworking chest. He rose slowly, favoring the swollen paw, and crossed the floor in short steps. May told him to stay back. He ignored her and pressed his nose against the leather tool roll beneath the tray. The roll contained gravers, punches, a polishing stone, and a bottle of bitter oil. May had searched it after the funeral. This time Pockets pawed at the stitching along the lower seam. One stitch had been replaced with waxed red thread. May cut it. Between the leather layers lay a postal receipt and a folded envelope bearing a Topeka return mark. The receipt was dated 11 days before Elias died. It showed he had mailed a registered packet to Thomas Reed at the State Revenue Office. The packet had been returned. Across the envelope, a clerk had written that documentary copies could not support an investigation without a sworn statement from a direct witness. Inside were 6 copied assessments, 3 freight numbers, and a letter in Elias's hand. May carried it to the workbench. Pockets lay beneath her chair, exhausted by the short walk. She unfolded the pages carefully, expecting a defense. The first line gave her none. I made the die. Elias wrote that Gideon had approached him 7 years earlier, when the cooperative owed $94 on the steam vat, and May had been ill through winter. Gideon said the county needed a replacement seal for damaged freight records. He offered $20 and promised to delay the VAT lien. Elias cut the star in county lettering. He engraved his initials on the handle because every tool he made carried his mark. He believed the die would reproduce legitimate seals. The second paragraph destroyed that excuse. Within a month, Gideon ordered him to stamp 2 barrels after dark at the freight warehouse. Elias saw flour dust beneath one bung and lamp oil beneath another. He understood the cargo was being relabeled. He stamped them anyway. May stopped reading. The cooperage walls seemed to contract around her. Pockets placed his good paw on the toe of her boot. She continued. Elias wrote that Gideon threatened to seize the vat, cancel county orders, and tell May her husband had already taken payment for fraud. Elias convinced himself one more seal would protect the shop long enough to find proof. 1 became 6. 6 became years of silence. The letter named no hero. It described a man who had known enough to stop and had not stopped soon enough. After the Hale seizure, Elias altered the die. He cut a hairline crack through the lowest point of the star so every false impression could later be identified. Gideon noticed nothing because the flaw looked like damage in the wax. Elias began recording barrel numbers, original contents, and the businesses attached to them. He built the false bottom in 47B, after Gideon ordered a second die. The list of 18 numbers was not complete. It was only what Elias had witnessed. At the bottom of the second page, his writing became uneven. I told myself I was protecting you. The truth is I was protecting the man you believed I was. May lowered the letter. Anger came before grief. Elias had allowed her to defend him for 2 years without giving her the facts needed to understand what she was defending. He had left her a puzzle because he had lacked the courage to speak while alive. The final page explained the returned packet. Thomas Reed's office needed a sworn witness. Ruth Bell could provide one, but Elias had asked her, and she refused. He planned to confront her again on the night he died. Near the freight warehouse, May looked toward the dark window. The official account said a loose wagon had struck Elias beside the loading platform. No hearing had questioned why he was there after midnight. The letter ended with a request, not for forgiveness, but for honesty. If these papers reach you, do not save my name by hiding what I did. That would only finish Gideon's work. May read the sentence twice. By morning, the special hearing would begin. Gideon expected her to argue that Elias had been falsely accused. The letter proved something more dangerous. Elias had participated, then tried to expose the system from inside it. Jonah returned shortly before dawn with 2 additional transfer deeds. May placed the confession in front of him. He read the first page and looked up. You still intend to use this? If I hide it, Gideon will reveal only the part that serves him. It may destroy whatever remains of Elias's name. May folded the letter along its old crease. Then his name will have to survive the truth, or not survive at all. Outside, the church bell marked 5. On the table lay 13 business names, 18 barrel numbers, 5 property transfers, and 1 confession that changed the meaning of every clue before it. The case was no longer about proving Elias innocent. It was about proving that his guilt had been used to hide a greater crime. The special hearing began at 9 the next morning in the county records room, where the ceiling was low enough to hold heat and accusation close to the body. May arrived with Jonah Hale, Amos Creed, Martha Venn, and 3 other former owners whose names appeared on Elias's list. Pockets rode in the market basket beneath a folded shawl. May had tried to leave him beside the stove, but he had climbed into the basket before she reached the door and refused to be lifted out. Gideon stood at the front table with Walter Pym and 2 members of the tax board. He greeted each former owner by name. He asked after Martha's sister and reminded Amos that the church pantry still had flour if winter turned difficult. His courtesy made the room feel less like a hearing than a gathering in which May alone had forgotten how respectable people behaved. The chairman read Gideon's request to accelerate the Danner auction. The county alleged that May had entered a restricted warehouse, removed records, interfered with a seizure, and circulated unverified accusations outside Bryan County. Gideon recommended reducing her remaining time from 21 days to 7. May placed Elias's letter on the table. "I will answer every accusation," she said. "But the board will hear this first." Gideon's expression barely changed. A private letter from an accused smuggler cannot replace public records. It does not excuse him. That answer unsettled the room more than a denial would have. May read Elias's confession, without omitting the $20 payment, the false seals he had applied, or the years he had remained silent. She read the sentence in which he admitted protecting the man she believed him to be. When she reached the altered star in the returned packet sent to Thomas Reed, Gideon folded his hands and waited. By the end, Jonah's anger had lost none of its weight, but it had changed direction. Several townspeople who had entered expecting May to defend a blameless husband now looked at her with discomfort. She had denied them the simpler story. Gideon rose. "Mrs. Danner has shown courage in admitting what many of us suspected. Elias created an unauthorized county die, falsified shipments, and attempted to shift responsibility after his participation became dangerous. He named your orders. A dead man can name anyone. He recorded 18 barrels, numbers written in his hand. He sent copies to the state. After years of profiting, Gideon never raised his voice. He did not need to. Each answer placed Elias between May and the truth like a locked gate. May presented copies of the auction transfers and the Account 47 notation. Gideon explained that Account 47 was a common escrow account used to settle seized property. The temporary buyers, he said, had acted as trustees when the county could not immediately dispose of buildings or equipment. "Why did every property enter the same trust?" May asked. "Administrative efficiency. Why were the assessments raised by exactly $100? Corrections for penalties and storage. Why did the rail office record shipments that never arrived? That is a question for the freight clerk, not the tax board." Ruth Bell was not present to answer it. The chairman examined May's copied figures and said the board could not rule on documents she had reproduced herself. Originals would be required. Gideon offered to provide the county ledgers after his office completed an internal review. May understood the shape of the trap. The man accused of changing the records had been given time to review them before anyone else could inspect them. Pockets shifted beneath the shawl. His nose emerged, turned toward Walter Pym, and remained fixed on the clerk's canvas satchel. Pym moved the bag beneath his chair. The bitter smell of engraving oil reached May when he did. It was faint beneath tobacco and leather, but she knew it from Elias's tool roll. Gideon had taken the brass die wrapped in cloth. It should have been locked in the tax office, not carried into the hearing. Pockets climbed from the basket before May could stop him. His bad paw struck the floor awkwardly, yet he crossed the narrow space and scratched at Pym's satchel. Pym kicked the bag behind the table. "Remove that animal." May reached Pockets first. As she lifted him, the satchel tipped and spilled folded papers, a waxed cloth, and 3 scorched vouchers across the floor. Pym snatched up the cloth before anyone saw what it held, but Jonah placed his boot over one of the papers. Gideon's courtesy vanished for less than a second. "Those are materials from the freight office cleanup." The voucher beneath Jonah's boot carried the heading Bryan County Mercantile Trust. Half the lower portion had burned away. The surviving lines showed an account number and a payment date matching the sale of Amos Creed's Candle Works. Account 47. Pym gathered the remaining papers. The chairman ordered Jonah to release the voucher and warned May that further disruption would end the hearing. Deputy Strake stood at the rear door. He had watched Pym retrieve burned records from the warehouse, and now he had seen the same papers carried into a tax proceeding. When the chairman called a recess, Strake followed May into the corridor. "The county does not keep the original disbursement vouchers," he said quietly. "The trust does. Will they show where the money went? They should show who received it." "Why tell me now?" Strake looked through the doorway at Gideon. "Because yesterday I could still believe Pym was destroying duplicates." Bryan County Mercantile Trust occupied the corner opposite the courthouse. Its manager, Horace Fenwick, refused to open account 47 for May. "Bank records," he said, "were private, and an accusation did not create authority." May did not ask for Gideon's records. She asked for the closing statement on her own cooperage, which had already been entered for future seizure. Fenwick said no sale had occurred, so no closing statement existed. Jonah then requested the final statement for his forge. Amos asked for the Candle Works. Martha asked for the harness shop. One by one, the former owners filled the lobby and demanded the records attached to property once held in their names. Fenwick could refuse May as an accuser. Refusing 7 former customers in front of witnesses was more difficult. He brought out a gray ledger and a packet of settlement slips. Each showed the auction price, the temporary buyer, the transfer into account 47, and the later disbursement. Jonah's $81 had entered the account under Caleb Morrow's name. Amos's $69 had entered under Lewis Trent. Martha's $74 had entered under Samuel Pike. The buyers received $5 each as trustee fees. The properties themselves were transferred to Bryer County Mercantile Trust. May followed the disbursement column. Most entries ended with a reference number rather than a name. Fenwick tried to close the ledger, but Amos placed his cane across it. "What does P-118 mean?" "A private note," Fenwick said. "Whose?" "I cannot disclose another customer's obligation." Jonah pointed to the voucher Pym had dropped, which May had copied before the chairman reclaimed it. The same reference appeared beside Amos's sale date, P-118. May asked Fenwick whether account 47 had paid a county expense, a trustee, or a private debt. He said nothing. Martha looked around the crowded bank. "You watched us lose our shops. Do not ask us to protect the privacy of the man who bought them with our own money." Fenwick's resistance broke slowly. He opened a second ledger and turned to the private note index. Note P-118 had been secured 7 years earlier against Gideon's house, his eastern pasture, and a commercial building beside the rail yard. Every time a seized property entered account 47, a payment was applied to the note. The pattern continued for 13 transactions. The final page contained the instruction authorizing those payments. Gideon had signed as county tax collector, trust beneficiary, and recipient of the private credit. 3 titles beneath one name. At the bottom, a bank clerk had written the current balance. Gideon's personal debt had been reduced by $986, using proceeds and property taken through the county auctions. May had entered the bank needing to prove that Gideon benefited from the seizures. She left carrying certified copies showing exactly how much. The certified copies did not remain in May's possession for an hour. Sheriff Amos Klein met her outside the bank with Deputy Strake and a warrant signed by Judge Corwin Vale. The order authorized seizure of any record connected to county tax collections, auction settlements, or the investigation of Gideon Price. Klein read it without looking at Gideon's name. May held the packet against her coat. "Who requested the warrant?" "Mr. Price petitioned the court after learning private financial records had been removed. They were given to me by the bank. Then the originals will confirm that. They are certified copies." Klein's expression hardened with embarrassment. "Mrs. Danner, do not make me take them from you in the street." The bank windows were full of faces. Gideon had chosen the place carefully. If May resisted, Mercy Crossing would remember the spectacle before it remembered the evidence. She handed over the packet and asked for a receipt listing every page. Klein counted them twice. Strake wrote the numbers himself and gave May the carbon slip. Before they left, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Keep that." The receipt proved the records had entered official custody. It did not prove they would remain unchanged. May returned to the cooperage and found pockets beneath the workbench. He had tried to climb into the market basket and failed. One claw had caught in the wicker, and his bad paw was swollen above the joint. May freed him, wrapped the leg, and carried him to the stove. He resisted until she placed Elias's old tool roll beside him. For the first time since the barrel opened, May understood that loyalty could become another form of cruelty if she kept asking him to follow. "You stay here now," she told him. "Whatever comes next belongs to the people who can stand upright." At noon, a notice appeared on the courthouse door. The tax board had accepted Gideon's request to reduce her remaining time. The Danner cooperage would be auctioned in 3 days, together with the house, steam vat, tools, seasoned oak, and 6 acres behind the yard. The notice also stated that unauthorized copies of county and bank records were under review. Anyone circulating them could face charges for interference with public administration. By 1 o'clock, 2 former owners withdrew their support. Eli Croft said his wife could not survive another scandal. The North Briar Cooper's son sent word that Gideon had threatened to reopen an old debt against the family farm. At 2, Ruth Bell came to the cooperage. She entered without removing her gloves and remained near the door. May offered her a chair. Ruth refused it. "Gideon says you intend to call me before the town. I intend to ask what you saw." You cannot. You wrote that wagon 18 never arrived. I wrote it because the station clerk had not entered a locomotive number. The shipment may have come by road. You told me Elias brought seals after dark. I was tired. I may have remembered the year incorrectly. May heard Gideon's pressure in every softened word. What did he threaten you with? Ruth looked toward the stove, where Pockets watched from beneath the shawl. I signed false entries. If I testify, he will say I helped create them. Did you? I copied what I was given. That is not the same question. Ruth's face folded inward. I had a son in Leavenworth with debts. Gideon knew. Once a month he put $5 in an envelope and told me which figures to carry into the clean ledger. I never altered the taxes. I only replaced the pages. The admission filled the room with a quieter guilt than Elias's confession. Ruth had not designed the machine, but she had kept it moving. Then tell the town that, May said. I will not go to prison so your husband can be forgiven. This is not about forgiving him. It is always about the dead with you. Ruth left before May could answer. Outside, Walter Pym waited beside a buggy and drove her toward Gideon's house. By evening, the story had changed again. At the mercantile, people said May had coerced an elderly clerk. At the church steps, they said Jonah had fabricated the trust copies. Gideon did not need to deny the evidence. He only needed to make every person carrying it look unworthy of belief. Jonah wanted to seize the county ledgers before the auction. Amos Creed proposed sending men to guard the records room. May refused both plans. If we take anything, she said, Gideon wins the argument before the proof is opened. He already has the papers, Jonah said. Then we stop making the papers the only proof. The idea came from the craft Elias had taught her. A barrel could be branded falsely. Its wood still remembered what it had held. May asked each former owner to bring one surviving object connected to the seizures. A hoop, invoice, repair receipt, transport tag, deed, or anything made before Gideon's office touched the record. Amos had a candle shipping stencil. Martha kept the brass buckle from the wagon that carried her harness stock. Jonah had 74C. Cowbell still possessed the flour invoices for $32K and its replacement. They could not out-control Gideon's records room. They could build a chain outside it. Sheriff Klein arrived after dark and watched the former owners arrange their papers across the benches. You are planning a disturbance at the auction, he said. We are planning to attend. Gideon says you mean to open seized containers in public. I mean to ask why flour barrels, axle crates, lamp oil casks, and candle shipments became whiskey only after they entered county custody. Klein rubbed the bridge of his nose. The auction is a lawful proceeding. So was every seizure. That is not fair. Neither were they. He warned May that any item tagged for auction belonged to the county until the debt was settled. Moving barrel 47B could be treated as theft. She showed him the inventory receipt. The barrel was listed, but the yard remained under May's custody until the sale began. Then I may move it within the property. Not into the square. The square is where the auction will be held. Klein had no clean answer. Before leaving, he said Thomas Reed's office had wired the courthouse that afternoon. A state revenue audit was scheduled for the end of the month. The end of the month is too late, May said. I know. Outside authority had come close enough to matter and remained too far away to save her. The next morning, Gideon posted a second notice. The auction would be held in the public square, where county officials could maintain order. The change was meant to control the crowd. May used it instead. She spent the day preparing 47B. She repaired the loose lower board without sealing it, chalked the 18 numbers on the inner wall where only those standing close could see them, and fitted the blackened strip from 32K beneath one hoop. She added no accusation. The barrel would carry only what already belonged to it. Pockets watched from the stove. When May rolled 47B toward the door, he tried to rise. His front leg buckled. May knelt beside him. You found it. I will carry it the rest of the way. At sunrise on auction day, Jonah and Amos arrived with a handcart. Martha brought the harness buckle. Cowbell came with the bakery invoices inside his coat. 3 other families joined them before the church bell rang. Gideon's men had erected a platform in the square. Sheriff Klein stood near the courthouse steps. Walter Pym guarded a locked document chest. Ruth Bell was nowhere in sight. The crowd parted as May crossed from Market Street. She did not bring a speech. She brought the barrel, the surviving objects, and the people whose losses had once been kept separate. Jonah lowered the cart before the auction platform. May set barrel 47B upright in the center of Mercy Crossing and placed one hand on its rim. "Before you sell my cooperage," she said, "you will show this town what you used it to steal." The auctioneer raised his gavel at 9 minutes. Gideon stood on the platform beside Walter Pym and the locked document chest. The sheriff occupied the steps below them. Behind May, the former owners formed an uneven line around barrel 47B, each holding the small object that had survived a seizure the county called lawful. The auctioneer began with the steam vat. May spoke before the first bid. "That vat is listed against a debt created by a shipment that never moved." Gideon addressed the crowd rather than her. "Mrs. Danner has been warned that this is not a hearing. The board has already ruled. On records, your clerk tried to burn." A murmur moved through the square. Gideon waited for it to fade. "The sheriff has those records in custody. Until they are authenticated, they prove nothing." May asked Sheriff Klein to open the document chest. "The warrant requires me to preserve the contents," he said, "not display them." Gideon nodded as though the law had spoken independently of him. The auctioneer raised the gavel again. Jonah rolled the iron hoop marked 74C onto the platform. Cal Bell placed the flour invoices beside it. Martha Venn laid down the harness buckle bearing her maker's mark. Amos Creed added the brass stencil he had used on candle crates for 19 years. One by one, they gave the true contents attached to the numbers on Elias's list. Machine parts, flour, harness stock, candles, lamp oil, seed. Gideon challenged their meaning. A barrel may be reused. A crate may be relabeled. A merchant facing penalties may remember whatever helps him now. He opened a ledger Pym had placed on the table. Elias's signature appeared on 6 entries, and Ruth Bell's initials stood beside 4. Gideon read the dates aloud, each one turning the crowd back toward the dead Cooper. "This is the county's original freight assessment book," he said. "It shows Elias Danner presented sealed containers and certified their contents. His widow asks you to believe every surviving clerk and officer was corrupt except the man who made the die." May recognized the trap. The signatures were real. The numbers between them were not written in Elias's hand. "Open the chest," she told Klein. "Compare that ledger with the copies you seized from me." The sheriff did not move. Judge Vale's warrant had made him guardian of evidence and prisoner of procedure at the same time. Gideon produced a second paper. "Mrs. Bell has provided a sworn correction. She now states that her note concerning Wagon 18 reflected an incomplete rail entry, not proof that the shipment was invented." Ruth's signature stood at the bottom. 2 former owners stepped away from May's line. Someone near the mercantile called for the auction to continue. The truth was strong enough to trouble the room, but not yet strong enough to survive it. May lifted Elias's letter. "My husband made the die. He stamped false cargo after he knew what Gideon was doing. He stayed silent because he was afraid of losing the shop and afraid of telling me what he had become." Gideon's face remained composed. "I have not hidden his guilt," May continued. "Gideon has. He used it as a wall. Every time Elias tried to step away, Gideon added another name behind him." She turned barrel 47B so the inner numbers faced the crowd. Cal Bell matched 32K to his canceled flour order and identified 61A as a bakery flour barrel later found behind the warehouse under a false whiskey seal. Jonah matched 74C to the axle crate. Amos matched his candle shipping stencil to another number on Elias's list. The auctioneer lowered his gavel, but did not set it down. Gideon ordered Pym to remove the barrel as seized property. Pym came down carrying a pry bar. Klein blocked him. "The lot has not been sold," the sheriff said. "It belongs to the county. It remains in Mrs. Danner's custody until I say otherwise." Everyone saw the break between them. Pym returned to the platform and whispered to Gideon. A gust lifted one edge of his coat, and May caught the bitter odor that had clung to Elias's engraving tools. A wagon rattled into the square from the direction of the cooperage. Deputy Strake drove it, with pockets lying in the footwell wrapped in May's wool shawl. "I left him at home," May said. "Pym's men went there with a seizure tag," Strake replied. "They locked him in the tool shed when he would not leave the metal chest. I found him scratching at the door. Pockets tried to stand, his injured paw folded beneath him, and Strake lifted him into May's arms. The old raccoon's nose moved toward the platform. He did not look at the barrel or the wax. He looked at Pym. Pym stepped backward. Pockets reached weakly toward the clerk's coat. A dark smear of engraving oil marked the lower pocket. Pym covered it with his hand. Gideon said the animal's behavior was meaningless. May agreed. By itself, it is. She set pockets in the basket and asked Pim to empty his pocket. He refused. Klein ordered him to comply. Pim produced a rag, 2 sealing sticks, and a key to the county records room. No die appeared. The crowd shifted again. Gideon almost smiled. The same bitter engraving oil darkened the rim of an ash barrel beside the platform stove. Pockets turned toward it and scratched at the basket. May carried him closer. He placed his good paw against the wood and scraped 3 times before stopping to breathe. Jonah tipped the barrel onto its side. Cold ashes spilled across the boards, followed by a waxed bundle. Inside lay the brass sealing die marked E. D. The crack through one point of the star was still packed with red wax. Pim ran for the alley. Strake caught him before he crossed the hitching rail. Gideon looked at the die and said May had planted it. "Then let us test it," she replied. She warmed a sealing stick over the auctioneer's lamp, pressed the die into fresh wax, and laid the impression beside the flakes from 47B, Jonah's assessment copy, and Ruth's saved notice for Amos Creed. The crack crossed the same point, at the same angle. A tiny burr near the lower letter caught wax in every impression. Klein unlocked the document chest. The certified bank copies showed account 47 paying Gideon's private note. The carbon dispatch page showed wagon 18 never reached the rail yard. The assessment copies showed repeated $100 additions. Together with the die, the cargo objects, and the transfer deeds, the evidence formed a chain no missing ledger could break. Gideon made his final attempt calmly. He said Elias had controlled the die and could have created every document. He said Pim had hidden it out of panic. He said account 47 had been misunderstood by people unfamiliar with escrow law. A voice answered from the church steps. Ruth Bell crossed the square carrying the original clean ledger pages beneath her coat. "I replaced these with the pages Gideon gave me," she said. $5 each month. He chose the businesses. Elias brought the seals because Gideon threatened his VAT lien, but Gideon chose the numbers and ordered the assessments. Gideon warned that she was confessing to a crime. "I remember," Ruth said. "That is why I am here." She identified his handwriting on the added digits, and the instruction linking the auction proceeds to account 47. Strake testified that he had seen Pim remove the rail ledger and burn manifests. Horace Fenwick confirmed the certified copies and Gideon's authority over private note P-118. The auctioneer placed the gavel on the table. Sheriff Klein removed Gideon's county badge and took the key ring from Pim. He ordered both men held for falsifying public records, obstructing an investigation, and conspiracy pending state review. Judge Vale protested that the sheriff lacked authority to suspend the auction without a board order. Klein held up the warrant receipt. The county cannot sell property using records now held as evidence of fraud. By afternoon, Thomas Reed arrived from Cedar Junction, where he had been conducting a revenue inspection. May's registered letter and Klein's wire had redirected him to Mercy Crossing. Reed did not discover the crime. He cataloged what the town had already forced into the open, sealed the trust ledgers, and suspended every assessment connected to the cracked star die. 13 businesses entered review. Some buildings had been resold and could not simply be returned. Others stood empty. The state promised hearings, not miracles. Yet the auction notices came down, and the families who had carried their shame separately began signing one statement together. 3 weeks later, May reopened the cooperage. She did not hang Elias's portrait above the bench. She placed his letter, the cracked die, and the returned postal receipt inside a plain lockbox. The objects belonged together: guilt, evidence, and the attempt that came too late. The county canceled the Danner debt. Restitution for the others would take months, perhaps years. Jonah regained the use of his old forge under temporary court order. Amos received the keys to his candle works, though half the roof had collapsed. Ruth gave her full statement and accepted that the law might still judge her part. May carved a new brand for the shop. It did not carry Elias's initials. M. Danner, Cooper. Pockets watched from a small barrel beside the stove, lined with burlap and built without a false bottom. His bad paw remained wrapped, and he no longer followed May into town. When she struck the new brand into the head of a flour barrel, he opened his clear eye at the sound, then settled again. Before closing the lockbox, May read the final line of Elias's letter once more. He had asked her not to save his name by hiding what he had done. She had not saved his name. She had saved the truth he had nearly buried with it.